Hello, everyone. My name is John Bristowe. Thank you for your time and attention joining us here today. I am the community director here at Octopus Deploy. I'm really glad that you could join us. Whether you're brand new to Octopus or just starting to explore how this fits into your deployment process, this session is designed with you in mind. So we're going to take things from the top and give you a solid foundation of everything that Octopus does, how it works, and how you can start using it to simplify and automate your software deployments. Now, in case you're wondering why we host these webinars, Octopus 101 is all about our ongoing commitment to make sure that you have the tools and the necessary skills to succeed with DevOps and deployment automation. We care a lot about deployments. And so we run these sessions every month and we host them across 3 geographies, the Americas, EMEA, and APAC, to make sure that it's accessible for you in your time zone. And so whether you're just getting started or bringing Octopus into a new team, this is your chance to learn how the basics work, and so it's giving you a chance to ask questions and to get up and running with confidence. Now, before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. This session is being live streamed across all our social media channels. So whether you're joining us from LinkedIn, YouTube, X, or Facebook, welcome. It's great to have you with us. And don't worry, everything's being recorded. You'll find a full session available up on our YouTube channel shortly after we wrap up. So if you miss anything at all, you want to share it with your team, or you want to recap what was said, you'll be able to catch the replay anytime. And because this is a live session, I would love for you to get involved. If you have any questions along the way, big or small, please feel free to drop them in the chat or QA panel. I'll do my best to answer them as we go, and we'll also leave some time at the end for any Q&A. So in this session, we're going to be exploring Octopus. We're going to be walking through the key building blocks of Octopus, things like projects, environments, deployment targets, and runbooks, things like that. I'll also show you how it fits into a typical CI/CD pipeline and where it can really shine, especially when you're working across multiple environments and or cloud platforms. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at this email address here. Happy to take your questions. Feel free to reach out anytime, especially if you have any questions around things that I've been showing you. So, as I said, what you're going to learn in this webinar, we're going to take a look at how Octopus works and why you should consider using it. We're going to take a look at some fundamentals, as I mentioned earlier. We're going to create a deployment process from scratch, much like baking a cake. I'll show you all the building blocks of it, the recipe and everything that goes into it. And then I'll show you how to trigger a deployment process using a CI process or server. CI stands for continuous integration, and it's typically where a lot of things start for a lot of developers. They typically start with a CI process or server. CI, continuous integration, is basically the process by which you build and test your software, the compilation steps. So that's kind of what we'll show there. And we'll show it as an example via GitHub Actions. All right, so to kick things off, let's start with a bit of a scenario. So the typical scenario that you would typically see Octopus run in with is this context here, where we have our developers on the left writing code, and our platforms that we're wishing to target on the right, which include a variety of targets. They can be anything from on-prem servers like IIS, Tomcat, etc., or it can be in the cloud. It can also be clusters like Kubernetes clusters, for example. All of these and more you can certainly support going forward as part of a hosting platform. In the middle is where Octopus really shines. So in the middle, we have our CI process and or server. That's an example of might be GitHub Actions, for example, or it might be other things as well. It could be Circle CI, could be CodeFresh, could be a whole bunch of different CI systems. In the middle is where we see Octopus operate. So the Octopus takes care of all your deployments as part of this solution. Now, the reason why you might use a solution like Octopus is because life without Octopus can be a bit difficult. It can be hard to manage. So on the left-hand side, we like to kind of think of this DIY shadow CD sort of premise where you're building a lot of scripts. You're having to cut a lot of code just to maintain your automations. And so with a tool like Octopus, we provide you the ability to have a safe and sane way of defining these deployment types, and we have a taxonomy for defining those things. In addition to that, we also give you the means of doing deployments in a safe and sane manner, and all of these are built in out of the box as part of Octopus. Now, looking at this from a more contextual perspective, without Octopus, I think you'll find this a little bit familiar. Typically, what you'll see is a lot of manual deployments, or you'll be writing a lot of scripts yourself, this sort of DIY deployments. And so what you typically see in an environment like this is, yes, you utilize source control through Git. You'll utilize tools like Jenkins and GitHub, etc. But more often than not, you'll have to stand up your own environments. You'll have to define configuration. That configuration may be a bit gnarly to define itself. There's a variety of tools you may have to utilize. kubectl, for example, environment variables can be a pain as well. All these and more can be a challenge from those aspects. And so what we try and propose with Octopus Deploy is let us take care of that hard stuff for you. So you still have source control. You still utilize your favorite IDEs. You'll still utilize things like container registries and artifact repositories. But inside of Octopus will be contained all the definitions for things like environments, your platforms, your patterns that you wish to employ, and all the stuff that comes along built in with Octopus itself. Things like DORA integration, so we expose metrics that allow you to track the rate of which you're doing your deployments. Anything around role-based access security, SSO auditing, etc. All these are built out of the box within Octopus. And to make this a little bit more concrete in the context of GitHub, in the case of GitHub, we support GitHub in a number of ways. So one of the ways in which we support GitHub is through GitHub Actions. So we have a whole boatload of actions that you can use that are available in the marketplace for integrating with Octopus. We also have a GitHub app that you can use. And we also integrate with GitHub Copilot. So we were one of the very first extensions available as part of the announcement when they announced GitHub Copilot extensions. And so GitHub Copilot is a way in which you can interact with Octopus. So these and other ways in which you can interact with Octopus, in addition to all the integrations that I'll cite a little bit later on. But that being said, let's go ahead and jump into a demo, because that's really the most exciting part there. So I'll jump and switch over to my browser. If you're all curious, you can check out Octopus by visiting octopus.com. There you can sign up for a free trial. You have two means of getting Octopus. You can either install it yourself. That's what we call Octopus Server. Or you can set up yourself with a free trial for Octopus Cloud, which is basically we host the instance for you. And either way is fine. You can host this or you can utilize the SaaS offering that we have. So for the project, for the demo itself, I'd like to jump over to an instance that I have here. And what I'd like to just lay out here is just kind of the way in which this is all laid out here. So what you see here is the dashboard for Octopus Deploy. If I jump up one level here, you get a sense of what this looks like. So the dashboard is like a single pane of glass where you get a sense of all of your projects, your applications, the environments that are available to you or that have been defined. These and other things have been defined as part of your dashboard. Your dashboard is your single source of truth around your deployments. It defines a bunch of things, which we'll go into in depth. But basically, it gives you a quick at-a-glance sense of what the status of your deployments is at any given moment. Now, taking a look at this dashboard, you can see at the top here, we have a wide range of definitions. So we have these things like deployment, staging, et cetera, et cetera. These and other sorts of names are defining my environments. So these environments here I've set up in advance. And you can see I've actually done deployments to these environments across various dates and times, et cetera. Along the left-hand side here, these are my applications. So I have a variety of projects or applications, however you want to define them. They're basically a unit of a logical unit for defining my project. And inside of each project, I can define a whole bunch of things. I can define a deployment process, etc. Typically, what you'll see is a one-to-one or one-to-many relationship between a project and an application. So if you want, you can define one project per application, or you can break it up into multiple projects. Let's take a look at an example of what an individual project looks like. So again, we have a dashboard available for individual projects. And the reason for that is because each project could be owned by different teams. You could use Octopus across teams, and so different teams may have access to different projects. Now, a project itself will define a deployment process. A deployment process is a series of steps that you will run to perform a deployment across your environments. And so you can see here I have one process that's defined. It basically is run a script. But really, when you go into the weeds here of what this looks like, you'll see the power of and flexibility of what you can do with Octopus. So let's go ahead and share with you a little bit of what you can do with deployment processes. Over on the right-hand side here, I have this button here called Add a Step. Let's go ahead and click that. And this is going to jump me into the process editor. So the process editor is basically where you can define your deployment process. So on the left-hand side here, you can see I have my run a script, which is a step. So a process is a collection of steps that run one after another, or in parallel. I'll talk about a little bit about that a little bit later. But these steps are available for you to define your process for deployment. And deployments can be they can be hundreds of steps. Like I've seen processes that almost get to that length. But typically you'll see processes that have tens of steps. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the steps that you can add. So we categorize them here on the left-hand side here into a bunch of different categories. We also have featured steps here that are most common for a variety of scenarios. So if I take a look at an example, let's say if I want to perform a Terraform operation, I want to stand up some infrastructure and I want to execute a plan, I can simply execute that by utilizing one of these steps. If I'm working with Kubernetes, for example, I can deploy a Helm chart, or I can run customize on my cluster, for example. These and other sorts of steps I can also add. I can add additional script steps. So we have run a script here, which is the one I already have integrated. But we have other ones as well. So for example, I could utilize ARM in the context of Azure and utilize that to deploy a template if I wanted to. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like when we actually add and configure a step. So I'm going to add another run a script step here. And what you'll see here is a bunch of knobs and buttons to control this step. First and foremost, I need to point out that I've added an additional step here to my deployment process. So before I had just one step here, which was run a script. Now I have a new one, which is another run a script. And we'll go ahead and change this a little bit. We'll give this a different name. So we'll just call this Hello Octopus 101, for example, just to give it a different name. That's all. It doesn't really matter. But you'll notice that inside this step, there's a bunch of, as I said before, knobs and buttons that I can control. These are the defining characteristics or attributes for how this step runs. So a step is running as part of a deployment process, and a step itself will do a series of actions potentially. In this case, run a script means give me the wheel, I want to drive. I'm going to write some script code here to perform this action. So if we take a look at the run a script step here, you'll notice I can define the source of the script itself in one of three locations. So I can say it's either inline, or it's part of a Git repository, or I want to download it from a package. It might be a zip archive or a tarball, things like that. And then if I define it as inline, I can simply write the PowerShell or any other number of shell commands here that I want to run as part of this. Now, you might imagine in a deployment context, a script or running a script might be a variety of commands that you can execute one after another. We give you that flexibility. And incidentally, run a script is the most powerful step we have, or sorry, the most popular step we have inside of Octopus. So it's there for a reason. It gives you control. But what's really nice about run a script is that it also exposes you a whole host of different variables that you have available to you in Octopus. So one of the things that's really important is as you migrate deployments from one environment to a next, say from example, from deployment or development to production to staging, etc., whatever, the variables or values between those environments can change. So we allow you to not only define these variable types, but you can also utilize them in a variety of contexts. So we expose these variables for you to use and expose them through a script step. Looking at a previous example here where I've already executed this, I have a shell script here where I'm just executing write host. This is like console.log or printf, etc. This is where I'm writing out to the console itself. This is an example of what you could do if you were so inclined to do so. There's a bunch of other steps, attributes that I can define as well. So I can define things like what environments this step will run, what conditions are associated with this step run. So if I want it to always run or I only want it to run in failure cases, these and other sorts of requirements I can specify on the step. I can also specify other things like timeouts and retries. The reason why this is important, because obviously when you're doing a deployment, you may be deploying to a remote location that has a network involved, and we can't control the network, but latency is a real world issue, and we may need to retry a step, especially in the case where you're running a script that takes a long time to execute. So if you're doing an upload, let's say you're uploading an image to a repository or to a registry, that may take a long time to execute. You may want to retry that step after it fails. And so these and other sorts of characteristics are available to you as part of this definition. So let's go ahead and just delete this step here, just because I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like when you actually do a deployment. I've simplified my deployment process into just a one-step deployment process. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a release. Now, a release is basically a snapshot. It it basically takes all those values that you propagated into defining your deployment and snapshots that so that you have basically a copy that you can use in a consistent manner. The reason why you want to do this is because if you're going to do things like rollbacks, for example, you want to have a previous state that you can roll back to. And so by defining things like snapshots, it gives you that capacity. Inside of our versioning, we can define things. You can define, calver. You can do semantic versioning, for example, if you wanted to. We'll auto bump those if you want. You can also auto increment these through a variable expression as well. So these and other sorts of characteristics you can certainly add. We also have the ability to integrate release notes. So if you're wanting to integrate as part of your build system, you can certainly include those as well. I'm going to assume the defaults and click on save. Now I've defined a release that has an associated set of environments that I want to target. If I had any things like packages or variables, etc., I could see those propagated here. But because this is sort of like a hello Octopus example, we're simply just going to go ahead and deploy to our development environment. So I've set this up in advance. It could be anything. But our development environment here is now ready to receive this release. I can define a schedule for this. I can give it a priority. The reason why is because a lot of these things may be taking place concurrently. I may have a lot of deployments going out at the same time. And so if giving this priority will escalate this to the top, I can certainly do that. I can also go in here and exclude certain steps from running. So let's say I have a 10-step deployment process and I want to exclude a particular step from running. I can certainly mark that as I don't want to run that. And there are a variety of reasons why you may want to do that. Certain steps may only run well or may be appropriate to run in a production environment, or vice versa. It could be only in development or staging. These and other sort of conditions can come up. You can also target these steps to only run in certain environments as well. Let's go ahead and now click on the deploy button and watch what happens here. One of the things that we care a lot about in Octopus is making sure that everything is audited. You want to be able to ask who did what, when, and why. And so auditing is a first-class concept inside of Octopus. And so we maintain not only a task log, but an event log across the entire system so that you get full auditing and compliance for every deployment that you do through Octopus. And so we give you that running log. You can certainly expand and contract the verbosity, for example, here. So I'm provisioning here a cloud environment that I can deploy to. You can see all the various logs that are propagating down. When it is successful, you get the nice green check mark here. I can also take a look at the task summary here if I had a lot of tasks here. Again, this is just hello world, but it's the same example here. I can take a look at the history of this release. If I deployed it to other environments, say, for example, if I promoted it to a different environment as well, so I could promote it, say, to all 6 environments that I want or other environments, I could certainly see those changes here. We also track things like changes to the release itself, if I had integrated changes here, and build information, which is really all the stuff that went into producing this release. Your commits, your work items, all the stuff that goes into typically your notes in GitHub, for example. All of that can be propagated to Octopus, and then you can auto-generate that as build information for a variety of purposes, README notes, etc. Another thing we also do is we produce a timeline for you to see when these actually occurred, these releases. So we give you this running log of when deployments occurred inside here as well, which is nice. And inside here, you can take a look at a variety. You can do redeployments, you can delete deployments and roll back, for example. These and other operations you can certainly do in the context of Octopus. So again, that auditing capability is really, really important. And it's something we care deeply about because it's really important to answer the question, who did what, where, what were the changes, etc. That auditing compliance it turns out to be really important. So there you go. That's the introduction sort of to Octopus, just from a first demo, kicking the tires perspective. What you'll typically see in this environment is a list of projects. There are a variety of locations you can go to check out more if you're at all curious. We have our demo instance as well, which you can check out, which is at demo.octopus.app. This is a cloud instance we have available you can check out as well. We have a variety of spaces here. Spaces, by the way, are basically like an isolation boundary. If you want to isolate projects from each other, you can do so using a space. It's like an isolation boundary. We also have our samples instance, which is at samples.octopus.app. And again, you can actually explore how these work as well, simply by navigating to these instances. And we have a bunch of scenarios. We have a bunch of sort of scenarios that you can play through if you're at all curious at looking at these. That's not the end of the demo, by the way. I'm just explaining to you kind of other resources you can take a look at as well if you're so inclined. But you can see as a dashboard, you get a very nice single pane of glass, one place to look for all your deployments across all your projects. And that's the idea. We want to give you a one-stop shop for you to look at for your deployments and get at a glance, okay, my deployments are good. We have other capabilities as well, which I can certainly talk to if you'd like, but it really depends on the sort of scenarios you're interested in going forward around how you're deploying and what you're deploying to. A recent innovation that we've added here, some folks may have noticed this, is this feature here called Live Status. This is a reflection of Kubernetes. So if you're integrating with Kubernetes and you want to see what the live object status is of various objects you have being deployed to, you can see I have a status here, which is marked as healthy. What that is reflecting basically the live object status of various objects you have inside of Kubernetes. So you can see we've just announced this recently. You can check that out. This is what it looks like. But if you're not doing Kubernetes deployments, obviously that's not something that's relevant to you. But what's really nice if you are doing Kubernetes deployments is we give you this ability to take a look at this. This is an early access feature. With the way this works is you take a look at your objects here. So your pods, your endpoints, your services, for example. I can take a look at any one of these. So I have a replica set here, for example. I take a look at this pod. Inside here, I get a list of not only my events, but logs. And I can even take a look at the manifest of this pod as well that went into this if I were so inclined. I'm not sure if our logs are, okay, there's our logs being emitted. Great. Do we have any events? No, we have no events, but that's fine. What this does, it gives me visibility into the live state of my object status. And then I can take a look at the timeline as well. So all of that is included as part of this. Awesome. So that is, in a sense, your introduction to Octopus from a one-on-one perspective. Now, remember, we're not done. We're just scratching the surface. I'm going to show you some more demos here. But again, if you had any questions, this is a live demo. You can check this. You can submit your questions, and I'll try my best to answer them live. But that's basically a primer, an introduction to how Octopus works. So we defined a bunch of things. We defined projects. We defined deployment processes. We looked at a release. We mentioned environments. All these sorts of things are available to you through Octopus. All right. So to summarize what you just saw, this is what a typical sort of deployment process may look like. So you have a series of steps. These steps are provided to you. This is a visual representation of your deployment process. You can add in here things like conditions. So whether a step succeeded or failed previously, you can do different conditions. So they're kind of like if branches. You can also have child steps. So you can have a series of child steps that run as part of a parent step. You can also have steps run concurrently. So you can have them run in parallel. We have integrated markdown notes. This is important, obviously, if you're wanting to utilize Octopus across teams and people want to look at your deployment processes and understand what each step does or what's required. What are the requirements, for example? I mentioned earlier, parallel step execution. You can simply mark a step as running in parallel and you'll have two steps running at once. And you also have a notion of environment labels. The reason why this is important is because as you define your deployment process, you want them to be flexible depending upon where they're running. So for example, you may want a certain deployment process to only run a certain way in staging, and then you want it to run a different way in production. You can define those through environment tags or environment labels. And what that does, it basically says this step will only run in these environments. And so we'll auto exclude anything that doesn't match. And so that's a really powerful way in which your deployments can be flexible for the environments for which they're targeting. So to talk a little bit more about the cases of why you might want to use Octopus after you've seen, I always try and show the demo as fast as I can because I want people to get a context, but I want to also underpin this as to why you might want to use Octopus as a deployment tool. So first and foremost, you want to have safe and, like I like to call, safe and sane deployments. Deployments are hard enough, and outside of scripting, I mean, there's really not much that's out there. And so we like to think of ourselves as the market leader in this space. We only do deployments. And so deployments are near and dear to us. And we care a great deal about this because we want your deployments to be as reliable and as risk-free as possible. So we want you to be able to deploy on Friday and on Saturday and on Sunday. These are really, really important aspects for getting your deployments correct. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want you to have a continuous delivery mechanism for your software. Being able to continuously deploy changes, no matter what time or what day of the week it is really important. In addition to that, we also want to provide rollback capabilities. So you can, if for whatever reason you get a deployment wrong or something breaks or there's a bug in your code, you can immediately roll back and you're back in production. So these and other capabilities are built out of the box with Octopus. Now, obviously, doing deployments and thinking about just the dev and DevOps is just half of the story. The other half of this is, of course, the operations side. We have a capability called runbooks, and what this allows you to do is basically perform all the operation tasks that you would typically need in conjunction with a deployment tool. So runbooks are a capability that we built into Octopus, and what this allows you to do is run all those operation tasks that you would typically think of when doing deployments. Things like migrate the database schema, perform a bunch of server patches, clean up all the old log files. These and other sorts of operation steps you can perform through runbooks. The nice thing about doing this here is that you can define this with all the configs that you need to run these maybe high trusted or high privileged operations, and you can have members of your team run them under those same credentials. Now, of course, those are secure credentials and we store them securely, etc. But everything's provisioned in here for people to run these either routine or emergency operations. Let's say your server goes down and you have defined an automation for restarts or for reboots or for bootstrapping back up. These and other sorts of runbooks you can define, and then simply just click on a run button to run those operations. Now, if you're utilizing Kubernetes, you're utilizing containers, maybe you're deploying to a variety of environments, etc. We integrate with Kubernetes, no problem. We also have support for inline YAML. Helm is an integration. We can actually deploy Octopus as a Helm chart if you wanted to. We have a lot of capabilities there. And a feature that often doesn't go really integrated within the first days of using Octopus is a feature called tenants or multi-tenancy. So the idea here is that typically your application may look and operate differently depending upon where it's running. So in a geo sense, if I'm running on East Coast Europe or East Coast, US or West Coast US, I may want to have different types of I might want to have my application run as a different tenant for those types of geo-specific cases. So these and other sorts of things you can define as what we call tenants. And so you can define different versions of your app across these tenants. And we define tenants or multi-tenancy out of the box with Octopus. And this is a feature that a lot of our customers who have used Octopus for a long time really love. When you first start using Octopus, it's like, tenants are, I get the idea of it, but when you start using it a lot and you become more mature in your usage of Octopus, tenants is just one of those have-to-use features for a lot of our customers. And so multi-tenancy turns out to be a really, really important capability. And it's a great facility for folks who are doing deployments in this scenario. And of course, as I mentioned before, auditing and compliance, really, really important. So we have built-in support for doing that. We also integrate with SSO. We have support, obviously, for integrations with Jira Service Management or ServiceNow. So the idea here is that I can use an additional service. Let's say I want to use ServiceNow, and I want to use it like the arbiter of or controller of when a deployment goes out. So I create a change request in ServiceNow, and then when that change request is or service deployment is approved in ServiceNow, it will then chain down to Octopus, and Octopus will do the deployment at the behest of ServiceNow. These and other types of integrations we support out of the box, and I'll show you a site that talks a little bit about that. But integrations are really, really important to us. We care a great deal about that. This is why we mention, the ability to do output of logs, for example, as well. So these are just a couple of scenarios, but you can output your audit log to third parties like Sumo or Splunk if you want to do analysis on via those services as well. So that's available to you. All right, let's take a look at some other demos here. Big fan of demos. I'll just quickly check to see if there are any questions. I don't see any at the moment. Let me just take a look here at other locations. All right, not getting any questions, which is fine. All right, cool. So another question that often comes up is, how do we kickstart a deployment? So I've shown you how to do this manually, right? So manual deployments through a tool like Octopus, pretty easy to understand, right? You just simply click a button, away you go. But how do we kick these things off through an automation context? Let's assume a scenario where I'm doing this via something like GitHub. I apologize for the context switch there. I realize I have GitHub in light mode. We support light and dark mode in Octopus as well. So if you jump back to Octopus, just to show you here, under your profile here, you can simply change your theme to light if you wanted to. So just in case people were wondering. But I do apologize for the contrast. Didn't mean to blow out your monitor there. All right, so I have a GitHub project here called Octo Pet Shop. It really doesn't matter what your project is. I'm just trying to show you the linkage that exists between these two projects. So in GitHub, we utilize a facility called GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions is in a well-known location. Typically in this scenario here, this is like .github /workflows. This is where you'll find your YAML files for defining your workflows that utilize GitHub Actions. So inside here, I have a bunch of YAML files here. And this YAML file, it really doesn't matter what this YAML file is doing too much. I just want to show you how these integrate. So in GitHub, you'll define a YAML script which defines your CI process. That can be things like build, then test, then do a bunch of other things. So this sort of preamble you see at the top here, this is all that build and test stuff that I mentioned. Down near here at the bottom is where we integrate via GitHub Actions. So you'll notice here we have a couple of steps here. These are GitHub Actions. This is for pushing packages to Octopus. So one of the things that we have built in is we have a built-in package repository in Octopus. So you can send us your zips, your tarballs, your jar files, anything that is defined for your application, you can send to us. You can push it to other locations as well. You can push it to Artifactory. It doesn't matter. We support those via feeds. I'll show you that in a demo in just a sec. But you can push your packages to us, and then you can do a deployment of that via the via the package that you just upload and the deployment process you defined. So this is the automation context that you might utilize in the context of GitHub. Now, if you're utilizing something like Azure DevOps, for example, this is using Azure Pipelines, for example, we have integration there. I'm showing you the old view of pipelines just because it's a little bit more colorful, but you can see we have integration there. You can utilize our CLI, you can create releases, you can deploy them, etc. So we have that built in. We also have integrations with BuildKite, with Jenkins, with I'm blanking right now. What's the other one? TeamCity. We're the #1 integration on the TeamCity marketplace with JetBrains. So these and other sort of CI processes you can certainly use in the context of your deployments and your pipelines. And so integrating with these turned out to be pretty important. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that you can integrate your packages as part of Octopus. And I realize I'm giving you a lot here to digest, but I'll just show you where this actually lives. So inside of Octopus, let me get rid of my head here so you can see this a little bit better. There we go. All right, so inside of Octopus, along the left-hand side here, you'll see this section here called external feeds. External feeds is where you can define your integration points, where you collect packages from. So external feeds include things like where your Docker Hub containers might be located on Docker Hub. Any Helm charts you want to get via helm.sh. These and other sorts of locations you can define as external feeds and use them as part of your deployment process. Now, that being said, we do have the ability, we have a built-in package repository inside of Octopus that you can certainly use. So you can upload packages directly here. If you wanted to, you could also upload them in an automation context. We actually have this built out of the box. So you can use this in the context of your deployments if you so wish. And that is something that we support. Let me just put my face back on the screen so you can see me. Great. All right. All right. So we have a question here. Let's see here. So there's a question here that asks, can the deployment processes also be defined / updated in code, i.e. for reuse or central control access across multiple applications? The answer to that is yes. We have a feature called config as code. And what this allows you to do is you can define your deployments as, and they will get persisted to Git. So that's really nice because what that allows you to do now is make changes to Git if you want to change those in code. It's not really code, but you get the idea. It's text files. So here you can see inside of this project here, I have a linkage with a Git repository. That's denoted by the branch icon here. And you can see I can switch branch. Sorry, I'm just trying to show this so you can see it. So we have integration here. Once you set this up, I'm writing any changes to a backend Git repository. In this case, it's actually hosted in GitHub. But I can certainly use those if I wanted to. And this propagates not only to your deployment processes, but also to your runbooks. So if you're using runbooks and you want to propagate, this is a new feature we've just added. You could certainly write those to Git as well. And you can track changes, create branches, and propagate those changes, in addition to other things like project settings, all that to Git. So that is a feature we have support for. So great question. All right. Let's take a look at other scenarios, just keeping track of time. All right, we're at 36 past the hour, which is fine. All right, so I mentioned integration with GitHub. I mentioned integration with Azure DevOps. If you're at all curious about other integrations we support, you can go to this website, which is at octopus.com/integrations. And there you'll see a page that looks like this. We talk a lot about our featured integrations here. We have a whole variety of integrations as well. This actually propagates as steps, and you can see this when you deploy, when you do a deployment process. So one of the things I neglected to mention in the deployment process here, if there's a step that we don't support out of the box, if you scroll down here to the bottom, there's a section here called community steps. We have over 566 steps that have been written by the community. So if you want to integrate, for example, with Azure, or run a bash command, or CyberArk, or I'm just picking them out of the list here. So Firebase integration, Google Chat, Teams, Slack, you name it, I think we've got it. So there's a lot of ways in which you can integrate and incorporate these steps into your deployment process, which is great. There are a variety of steps that we support out of the box, but again, if we don't support it, you can find it there. And you'll find these up on our integration site, which is here. Some of these integrations obviously live outside the context of Octopus. So for example, we were to click on GitHub here, for example, these not only mention the actions we have, but there's also the app as well. So if you go to the marketplace here for GitHub and do a search here for Octopus, here you'll find the list of all the things that we integrate with via GitHub. So for example, these are our actions. There's our integration with GitHub Copilot. There's our app there. So we have integration points across the board, depending upon what your scenario may be. And this also applies to other CI processes or solutions. And I mentioned a few of them already, so they are there for you to use. Great. If you're at all curious, you can check out our roadmap, which is at roadmap.octopus.com. A lot of questions always come up about like, okay, so what's coming next? What have you got featured, etc. We publish everything here. And as I jokingly tell people, make this a bookmark, if not a homepage. Check it out. We've got this updated all the time. We just shipped 2025.1, which includes some awesome features. I mentioned config as code for runbooks, which is that feature of being able to propagate your runbooks into Git. We have other features as well. We have the ability, for example, to do a generic OIDC. This is really important if you're wanting to do server-to-server communication in a secure context. This allows you to integrate with backend services, for example. You can do things like, get live object status for Helm charts, for example. I mentioned live object status already. We have other features as well that are built in here, being able to freeze by tenant, things like that. So we give you a lot of power and flexibility, and we're adding to it constantly. If you're a member of the tribe that's running on Octopus Cloud, you get these features a little bit earlier because we have a safe and sane environment to use those deployments to. But if you're running this self-hosted, you get those in every release that we ship. We have some other features that we're thinking of. These are our planned features here. And if you happen to have an idea for a feature, you can certainly submit your own and let us know what you think for those ideas going forward. All right, let me jump back into my slides and we will wrap things up. So hopefully in this webinar, you got everything that I promised you. You saw a little bit about how Octopus works, and more importantly, how and why you should consider a tool like Octopus Deploy. There are a variety of scenarios that you can certainly do it yourself, a DIY, but Octopus makes it available to you in a very well thought of environment and solution. You saw some of the primitives or fundamentals of Octopus. So I mentioned things like projects, deployment processes, releases, etc. These are terms that you'll come to know as you kick the tires yourself of Octopus. We talked about how to create a deployment process from scratch, and you saw some examples of deployment processes as how they look, and then how to trigger that deployment process through a automated process hosted either in GitHub or other sort of scenarios. All right. And with that, as they say, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. If you need to reach me, my email alias is here. I have some resources for you to check out. As I mentioned earlier, don't worry. Everything's been recorded. It's available up on our YouTube channel. We are live, as you can see here. So this will be interesting. So we are live here right there, but we have a bunch of videos listed here. You can see we do a show called Deploy on Friday. Again, we're trying to espouse the fact that we want to do deployments any time of the week. But if you want to catch up on all the latest news of the week related to Octopus, you can check out our show called Deploy on Friday. Otherwise, we publish videos on all kinds of features, what's new, etc. So check that out. And a copy of this will be, of course, available for you to watch after the fact. And if you want to check out a instance of Octopus yourself, feel free to register for a free trial at octopus.com. All right, just taking a look at the questions here. I don't see any questions listed, which is either a good thing or a bad thing. There you go. All right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. Again, we run these monthly, so feel free to attend anytime. And we do run them across different geos as well. So we have one for Americas, one for Europe, and one for APAC. So feel free to grab the time slot that works best for you. Thanks a lot for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one. Happy deployments, everyone. Take care.